Welcome to the deep dive. We're going back in time today, going back to 2008,
Oh, wow.
the year Bitcoin was born. Well, not exactly born, but,
Uh,
the year the Bitcoin white paper landed. And we're going to deep dive into it.
it's amazing how this document, it really set the stage for a whole new way of thinking about money.
Yeah.
A system that could operate without those traditional gatekeepers, like banks.
Yeah, completely cutting out the middleman. So I guess even back then, people were kind of frustrated with how online payments worked.
Oh, absolutely. The paper starts by pointing out those very problems.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it highlights how back then every online transaction had to go through a third party.
Right, right. Like a bank or...
Exactly. A bank, a payment processor, you name it.
Yeah.
And that, inherently has some drawbacks.
Yeah, you're trusting someone else with your money.
Exactly. You're putting your faith in this intermediary, hoping they'll handle everything securely and fairly.
And hoping they don't get hacked or go bankrupt or...
Exactly. And what if there's a dispute? Who do you turn to? Those were real concerns.
And Bitcoin kind of sidesteps all that.
That's the goal. That's the core innovation that Satoshi Nakamoto, the mysterious author of the white paper,
Yeah.
proposed.
Yeah.
A system where trust isn't placed in a single entity, but in a network,
Okay.
a decentralized network.
So no more banks calling the shots.
That's the system.
Oh.
And the way this is achieved is through the clever use of cryptography. You see, Bitcoin is built on complex mathematical algorithms
Okay.
that guarantee security and transparency.
So it's like a giant math problem that keeps everyone honest.
In a way, yes. One of the key concepts here is digital signatures. Imagine every transaction having this unique digital code
Okay.
that proves it originated from you and hasn't been tampered with. It's like a digital fingerprint that guarantees authenticity.
I like that, a digital fingerprint. But okay, I'm already thinking, if anyone can join this network, couldn't someone just copy their Bitcoin and spend it twice?
You've hit upon the classic double spending problem, a challenge for any digital currency.
Right.
But Bitcoin has a solution, and it's a groundbreaking one. The blockchain.
Okay, the blockchain. I feel like I hear that word everywhere.
And for good reason. It's the backbone of Bitcoin. Think of it as a massive public ledger,
Okay.
a record of every single Bitcoin transaction ever made. And this ledger isn't stored in one place, it's distributed across the entire network.
So everyone has a copy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of what makes it so secure. Now, the blockchain part of the name comes from how this ledger is structured. New transactions are grouped together into blocks, and each block is cryptographically linked to the one before it, forming a chain.
So like if you try to mess with one block, the whole thing falls apart.
Precisely. That's why it's called a blockchain. Any attempt to alter past transactions would require rewriting the entire blockchain, which is practically impossible.
Okay. But if everyone has a copy of this blockchain, how do we all agree on which version is the correct one? Wouldn't that get messy?
That's where the brilliant concept of proof of work comes in. Imagine a huge decentralized competition
Okay.
where computers are racing to solve incredibly complex math problems.
And the winner gets to?
The winner gets to add the next block to the chain. This process is called mining.
Mining, right. So it's not just a popularity contest.
Not at all. It's about who has invested the most computing power. This proof of work is what ensures that the blockchain remains secure.
So the more computing power dedicated to this mining thing, the more secure the network becomes.
Exactly. You can trust the system because manipulating it would require an immense amount of computing power and resources, far more than any single entity is likely to have.
That is really clever. But I'm guessing most people using Bitcoin aren't solving complex math problems.
That's right.
So how do we know our transactions are legit?
Good question. Bitcoin uses something called simplified payment verification. You don't need to download the entire blockchain to check a transaction.
Oh, good, because that sounds like a lot.
It is. Instead, you can use what's called a Merkle tree. It's a way to prove a transaction is in the blockchain without downloading the whole thing.
A Merkle tree, is that like, I don't know, like a shortcut?
Yes, a shortcut to verify transactions.
Yeah.
Much more manageable.
Okay, that makes sense. But one thing I've always wondered about Bitcoin is this whole privacy thing. If everything's recorded on this public blockchain, how is it private?
It's a great question, and it's where things get a little tricky. While every transaction is public, the identities behind those transactions are not.
Okay.
They're represented by these, alphanumeric addresses, not real names.
So it's like I can see money moving around, but I don't know who's sending or receiving it.
Exactly. Think of it like a stock exchange. You see the trades happening, but you don't know the identities of the traders.
Okay, that makes sense. So there's some privacy, but it's not like totally anonymous.
Right. It's more about pseudonymity than complete anonymity. There are ways to potentially connect those Bitcoin addresses to real-world identities,
Oh,
especially if users aren't careful. But that's something we can explore in more detail later in our deep dive.
okay, yeah, my brain is already doing backflips trying to keep up with all this. Maybe we should take a little pause and come back to this whole privacy question in a bit.
Sounds good to me. It's
Yeah.
a fascinating but complex aspect of Bitcoin.
Okay, so we've talked about the blockchain, this kind of amazing public ledger, and how this proof of work thing keeps everything secure.
Right?
But you mentioned that miners get rewarded for like all their work. How does that work exactly?
Yeah, so remember, miners are the ones dedicating all this computing power
Yeah.
to solve those complex mathematical puzzles, which is what allows them to add new blocks to the blockchain.
Right.
It's the backbone of Bitcoin security, really.
Right.
But it also comes at a cost, you know?
Oh, yeah, like electricity and all.
Exactly. Electricity, hardware, maintenance, cooling.
Yeah.
It adds up. So the question is, how does the system incentivize miners to keep doing this?
Yeah. They can't just be in it for the love of math, right?
Uh-huh. Well, some might be. But the real motivator is the reward system. When a miner successfully solves a puzzle and adds a new block, they get a couple of things.
Okay.
First, they get newly created Bitcoins.
Oh, so new Bitcoin is just like created out of thin air.
Well, not exactly thin air. It's part of the protocol. The system is designed to release new Bitcoin into circulation as blocks are mined. Currently, it's 6.25 Bitcoin per block.
Wow. And does that ever change?
It does. It's actually designed to decrease over time. Roughly every 4 years, the reward is cut in half.
So it's like built-in scarcity.
Exactly. It's a mechanism to control the supply of Bitcoin and prevent inflation.
I see. So that's one part of the reward. What's the other part?
The other part is transaction fees.
Okay.
You see, when you send Bitcoin, you can choose to include a small fee,
Oh, okay.
and miners will prioritize transactions with higher fees.
So if I'm in a hurry, I can pay a little extra to get my transaction processed faster.
That's right. It's like a bidding system. Miners are free to choose which transactions they include in the next block, and higher fees are more attractive.
It's fascinating how it all works, all these economic incentives built in.
It's really quite ingenious.
But it also makes me think, couldn't a bunch of miners just team up and try to manipulate the system, to benefit themselves?
That's a smart question, and it's something Satoshi Nakamoto addressed directly in the white paper.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he did these mathematical calculations that show just how hard it would be to actually do that. It comes down to computing power. As long as the majority of computing power is controlled by honest nodes, the ones following the rules, the network stays secure.
So it's like a democracy, but with computers.
You could say that. A democracy of computing power. To really change the blockchain, an attacker would need to control more computing power than everyone else combined.
Whoa.
And they'd have to rewrite the entire blockchain from the point where they want to make a change, all while everyone else is adding new blocks.
Yeah, that sounds pretty impossible.
It's incredibly difficult, to say the least. The white paper compares it to a gambler trying to catch up after falling behind.
Yeah.
The longer the blockchain gets,
Yeah.
the harder it is to change it.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly secure system, but let's go back to the transactions for a minute. How does Bitcoin make sure that transactions can't be reversed? Because in traditional systems,
Right.
there's always that possibility of a chargeback or a dispute.
That's a key difference with Bitcoin. Irreversibility is like fundamental to how it works.
Oh, okay.
Once a transaction is buried under enough blocks, it's pretty much impossible to reverse it.
So the more blocks that are added after my transaction,
Yeah.
the safer it is.
Exactly. The more confirmations a transaction has, the deeper it is in the blockchain and the harder it is to mess with. The white paper even has calculations showing how this works.
Oh, wow.
After about 6 confirmations, it's generally considered irreversible.
6 confirmations. Okay, so there's a bit of a wait then. It's not instant.
Right. Bitcoin prioritizes security and immutability over, pure speed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In the grand scheme of things, waiting a few minutes for confirmations is a small price to pay for the level of security you get.
Totally. But I'm not really sure what confirmation is. Like, what actually happens?
So let me break it down. So let's say you buy something with Bitcoin. The transaction gets broadcast to the network and goes into what's called a mempool.
A mempool.
It's basically a holding area for transactions that are waiting to be added to a block.
So it's like pending.
Exactly. Then miners pick transactions from this mempool based on the fees offered and put them into the next block they're creating.
Oh, okay.
And once that block gets added to the blockchain, that's your first confirmation.
Oh, I see. So each block that's added after that is another confirmation.
Exactly. With each confirmation, your transaction gets buried deeper in the blockchain, making it harder and harder to reverse.
So it's like adding layers of security.
Precisely. It's this combination of layered security, decentralization, and the incentives for miners that makes Bitcoin so robust.
It's truly remarkable how well thought out this system is. But you said earlier that Bitcoin has some limitations too. What are some of the challenges it faces?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges is scalability. As more people use Bitcoin, the network has to handle more and more transactions.
Right.
But each block has a limited size, and new blocks are only added every 10 minutes or so.
So if a lot of people are trying to use it at once, things could slow down.
That's the concern. It's like a highway that gets congested during rush hour.
Oh, yeah.
As more cars or transactions try to use it, things get backed up, transaction times increase, fees go up. It can get messy.
But are people trying to solve this problem?
Oh, absolutely. There are tons of people working on ways to improve Bitcoin's scalability.
Oh, good.
Some of these solutions involve actually changing the core protocol, like making the block size bigger. Others are focused on developing what we call layer 2 solutions, which basically run on top of the main blockchain.
Layer 2, like a second level.
You got it. It's like
Okay.
adding extra lanes to that congested highway.
Makes sense.
One example of this is something called the Lightning Network, which allows for much faster and cheaper transactions by moving them off of that main blockchain.
Oh, so it's like a separate network, but it still interacts with the main Bitcoin blockchain.
Exactly. It's just one of many really cool ideas being explored to tackle the scalability issue.
This is all so fascinating, but I think my brain needs a break to process all this. We've covered a lot of ground, from the technical details to some of the big challenges,
Right.
but there's still so much to talk about. When we come back, let's dive into those privacy concerns we touched on and also explore some of the real-world applications of Bitcoin.
Yeah, and we can talk about what the future holds for this whole, revolutionary technology. I think that'll be really interesting.
Okay, so where were we? Ah, yes, privacy in the wild west of Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's definitely a hot topic, and understandably so.
So, real talk, how private are Bitcoin transactions?
Well, the thing is, the blockchain itself is public. That means anyone can see all the transactions that have ever happened.
Right.
But the identities behind those transactions are hidden behind, these alphanumeric addresses.
Okay, so it's not like my name is plastered next to every transaction.
Not exactly. It's more like you see money moving between these coded addresses, but you don't automatically know who those addresses belong to.
So it's kind of anonymous?
It's more like pseudonymous. There's a subtle difference.
Okay.
With enough effort and some pretty sophisticated tools, it might be possible to link those addresses back to real people,
Ah.
especially if users aren't being careful about, protecting their privacy.
So it's not foolproof.
Got it.
So what can people do to, like, stay private when they're using Bitcoin?
Lots of things.
Yeah.
One important step is to use a new Bitcoin address for every transaction. That makes it harder to connect the dots and build a picture of your activity.
Oh.
You can also use mixing services, which basically jumble together Bitcoins from different users.
So it's harder to track where they're going.
Exactly. It's like shuffling a deck of cards.
Mm.
And there are also privacy-focused wallets that have extra features to protect your anonymity.
So there are ways to be smart about it.
Absolutely. You just have to be proactive. Privacy in the Bitcoin world isn't something you can just take for granted. You got to work for it a bit.
Okay, good to know. But, thinking about the big picture here, I think it's important to remember that Bitcoin isn't just about, like, the technical stuff.
Right.
There are also these broader implications, right? Societal,
Don't you?
economic.
Oh, absolutely. When that white paper came out in 2008, Bitcoin was this super fringe idea. Now it's this global phenomenon. I mean, the total value of all Bitcoins is in the trillions.
It's crazy. So do you think it's lived up to its original vision?
I think in many ways it's exceeded expectations. It's created this whole new financial system, one that operates outside of those traditional structures.
Yeah, it's definitely shaken things up.
It offers faster cross-border payments, often with lower fees, and it gives people more control over their own money.
And of course, there's the whole investment side of things. The price has been on a roller coaster ride.
Volatility is definitely part of the Bitcoin experience, but I think it's important to look beyond that.
Yeah.
Bitcoin has empowered people in ways that just weren't possible before, especially in places with unstable currencies or limited access to banks.
Right. It's given people options.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that Bitcoin is still young. It's evolving all the time.
That's true.
New innovations, new applications. Who knows what the future holds?
Well, I have to say, this deep dive has been mind-blowing. We've gone from the nitty-gritty details of the blockchain to these big philosophical questions about money and power.
It's been quite a journey.
And I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. I mean, we could probably talk about this for hours. But for now, dear listener, I think it's time for us to wrap things up. Hopefully, this deep dive has sparked your curiosity. If you want to learn more, there's a whole world of information out there about Bitcoin. Keep exploring.